And I think you have to understand how that changes a market. When you have more people looking than there are jobs, like we discussed, employers can be choosier. But beyond that is wage stagnation, right? Because the reason wages grow is a supply and demand. It's just like housing. Like if you have 100 people applying for one job, you don't have to necessarily pay as much as if you have 3 people looking for one job. Okay. So a lot of you at home might not have gotten any kind of raise in December. Like usually you get 3% wage growth or maybe even more. There's a lot of companies right now because of high interest rates and because of the economy that aren't doing that. And truthfully, because there's so many job seekers, they don't have to do that. They don't have to give you a better wage because there's a bunch of people that are willing to take on your job right behind you. So that is a big shift from what we've seen in the last few years when we've seen a lot of wage growth.
Yeah, so I if you guys are considering, let's say, moving positions or, for whatever reason, just understand that the job market right now is frothy. Like, there's a lot of choices that employers have, and so the employee is losing, not in every industry, but it's losing a little bit of the leverage that they've had in the past. It's shifting back toward the employer. And what does that mean? What that means is exactly what Danille just said. If we get 50 to 100 applicants for a position, which is, by the way, what we are getting, that's not a guess. We have lots of choices, right? And with that, we typically we got more candidates, which oftentimes means sometimes we can get better candidates and for better pricing because we have so many options. If I have 2 or 3 or 4 options for a position, obviously that gives me more leverage, and that's where we're heading now. So if you're in an industry and you've been there a while, before make sure before people could leave, and they could leave for Costa Rica and then come back and just go be absorbed right back into the economy. I think that's changing now. I don't think that unless you really have something solid. I do think that I'm speaking from an employee standpoint. You got to make sure you have something solid before you make a move.
And the other thing I want to address too is the work from home. So we saw a big spike in work from home due to COVID, but also due to not having enough employees for a job. So, we had to make our workforce more appealing and offer remote positions or work from home positions or flex positions because, like I said, you have 2 or 3 candidates, you need to be a strong competitor. We're seeing remote work kind of being taken off the table. Full-time remote work is still really hard to find where it wasn't a few years ago. And now even flex positions, a lot of companies are pulling their workers back into the office. And the reason they're doing that is because employers never wanted their workers outside of the office. That was never something that most employers wanted, but they had to do it because of the supply and the demand. But now that the employer is back in control, you're going to see more full-time office work. And you're seeing that in a lot of big companies right now.
Yeah, and so it's making its way through, as you can say. The other thing is, more and more people are getting into debt, and this buy now, pay later, and all of that stuff is a big piece. And so, I'm specifically talking more about housing now, of course, but not just housing, but just as an employee, your costs are going up, and I think inflation has crept through, and your wage growth has probably not kept up as it relates to inflation. And so there's even more risks moving forward because nobody knows, where inflation is headed. The last thing we want is let's call it 2, 3, even 4% inflation, and a really frothy job market where there's not a lot of options because these costs. We don't see a big adjustment in any of these costs. How about you? Do you see those coming?
No, I don't see inflation going down. One of the bigger things that I would be concerned about is, people are having trouble absorbing this inflation at their current levels. And wages, while inflation did rise, so did wages. If we start to see a deflation in wages, I don't think we're necessarily going to see a deflation in the inflation that has happened over the last few years. So that is going to, make it harder to live, on the amount of money that you're making. And I think that hits the next point that is more concerning. So, like we had said before, having more people looking for jobs than jobs is pretty normal, even though it hasn't been for the last few years. But what we're seeing now that's a little bit abnormal is we have job seekers being added to the workforce at kind of a record number. And then we have those amount of jobs going down. So you have to wonder why these people are coming off of the shelf and starting to look for a job. And I think a lot of it plays into this inflation and then the deflation on the wage of perhaps the other spouse.
Yeah, well, that's that labor participation rate. As you know, we talk about this, and what does that mean? It literally means what it says. It's labor participation. That actually has been declining for years and years and years. And I would imagine that with this shift, you're going to start to see it climb back up again. And to your point,
well, you already are, yeah.
Yeah. The money just. It was a really interesting 10-year period we had, where I think people just left and then they jumped back in whenever they wanted. It's like almost like a treadmill or I can jump on it any time and be fine. I'll live off of what I can, but I think those days are gone.
Well, and I think too, you're missing a big piece too, because I think there's a lot of stay-at-home parents that are coming off the shelf. So, a husband and wife, maybe the husband works, the wife stays home with the kids. That was always the plan. But now things are tight and maybe the kids are in school. So she's realizing now I need to go to a full-time job. And like Jerry had said earlier, maybe before it was side hustles here and there, but now with this inflation, or maybe their partner lost their job or had to take a pay decrease, they're having more hard time catching up. So then that brings somebody else off the shelf. So while I do think in COVID, it was kind of a different cycle where people would just take off for a year and go do a trip, I think now it's more structurally what is financially making sense.
Yeah, and I think this is really coming after the white collar more than anything, that middle management. The AI is creeping up. Like we've talked a lot about the paralegals, the lawyers, and the CPAs and things that can be automated, bookkeeping and that kind of stuff. But one of the areas that I think is going to really continue to be strong moving forward is the blue collar side of it.